Welcome to the Wooper Club League Season 13 Draft Recap. We got a nice special season going on this time around. We'll tell you all about it right here. I am your host, IllLogic. I'm coach of the Buffalo Bouffalant. As always, I am joined by SteveChuck, coach of the Waterdeep Wobbuffets.
Hey, everybody.
As well as Michael, coach of the Route 1 Birbs.
Yeah, it's me.
Let's go. Awesome. So you two were heavily involved in this process, and I say process because this is not a normal draft season for us. So we do have Pokemon Home Release, which introduced a lot of new Pokemon and some old ones, old friends here from the previous games that were not available in Scarlet Violet. But we are doing an auction, draft, and pickup this season. Steve, I'm going to put up the pods here for the beginning. What do pods mean? What are we talking about with pods? What auction schedule? What are we talking about, Steve? Please break everything down for us so we're aware of what we're following here in Season 13.
Yeah, so the general idea of the auction format is instead of having a complete team from the get-go and then doing a couple trades or free agency tractions to fine-tune it over the time, you're instead building your team throughout the season. So at the beginning, we all started by drafting 6 mons, which I'll talk about in a second. And then every week there are, I believe, 25 mons put up for auction for the 14 coaches to bid on. And whoever bids the most gets to add that Pokemon to their team. To facilitate this, we've added a currency called the Woop Bucks. All the coaches started with 50 Woop Bucks. And after every week, we'll be getting 10 more for a total of 120 available throughout the 8 weeks. Some coaches may want to spend a lot early. Some may want to save and get some other things later. But that is, every coach's decision, and it, will create a unique experience where you need some key mons early in order to get wins, but you also need to make sure you have the money you need to buy the key pieces you need later in the draft. Regarding the later in the season for auctions, regarding the draft at the start of the season, I know some other leagues have done this before where they just assign teams a random 6 Pokemon, but we were a little hesitant with that, wanting to give coaches a little bit more agency. So we devised this drafting in pods strategy where we set up 28 pods of Pokemon. We called them the A pod and the B pod. And each pod consisted of a set tier distribution. So the A pod had a tier 1, a tier 3, and a tier 5. And the B pod here had a tier 2, a tier 3, and a tier 4. And the draft process was everybody picked one A pod and one B pod. So whoever was first up could pick whichever pod they wanted. Second could take one of either all the way through the 14. And then on the wheel, you have to pick one of the other types of pods to fill out your initial tier distribution to start of a 1, a 2, 2 3s, a 4, and a 5. And that's the general format. There will be auctions every week. 8 weeks of play, so the teams will be changing greatly every week. We'll end out the season with a playoffs between the top 8 teams and any play-in teams that have equal ranking to the 8th place team, and crown another Wooper Club League champion.
And of note, we do have some limits here on the amount of funds you can get from each tier so that people aren't just constantly bidding and getting all the tier 1s. You have 2 tier 1s, 2 tier 2s, and 4 tier 3s, so we'll see some nice rounded teams from a lot of different options. And speaking of those, Michael, I know you were involved with both the creation of these pods as well as the auction schedule itself, which we'll be able to look at each week as mons become available. What went into the process here? It seems like there's kind of a mixture of a little bit of randomness, but there's, I think, still a little bit of touch of something, trying to see some new interesting things here. What all went into the creation process for the pods and the auction schedule?
Yeah, so when we were going through and making the pods, we tried to keep things relatively balanced. With only having 5 tiers this season, the variance and power between Pokemon in a single tier can vary a bit more. So we tried to balance out, if you had a slightly worse, tier 1 in an A pod, you might have a better tier 5. But really, we were just trying to make fun pods, give people mons that we thought they would want to use, that we wanted to see in the season, and we want this, with all the gimmicks and everything, to be evolved to be an exciting season. So as we get to going over what all of the coaches actually got, you'll see a lot of the new Pokemon show up, especially, we're talking about stuff like all of the Hisuian mons. We're talking about stuff like Walking Wake and Iron Leaves, that wasn't available in our last season, and we really wanted to make sure people could play with from the start of the season this time. Then we went and we looked at filling out the auction schedule. The auction has a lot of Pokemon in it. I think it's 25 a week are going up. And we tried to again front load some of the Pokemon that we wanted to make sure people had time to play with stuff that maybe hasn't seen a lot of use in the league before. We wanted to get that stuff out there, so before maybe some of the more traditional options come out in the auctions later in the season, we get those Mons a chance to actually earn their spots on the team. Try to spread out types, so if you were really left high and dry from your draft or some of the early auctions as far as a particular type is concerned, we tried to make sure that stuff like your fairies, your steels, stuff like that was sprinkled out pretty consistently throughout all of the auction weeks. But yeah, we just wanted to make sure that people were putting together really fun teams this season, and of course trying to keep things relatively balanced.
Yeah, really proud of how balanced this actually ended up becoming. Really cool to see the spread of these mons. I note a nice even spread here too of hazard removers. Those are the ones that are bolded and italicized on this sheet here. Really cool to see a lot of interesting mons that maybe people wouldn't pick up in a draft ordinarily, but have always wanted to try but don't quite fit on teams. We're giving you the opportunity right here and now to do that with an unexpected squad. With that out of the way, let's hop into the draft itself and let's see what these coaches are working with, at the very least, for the first week or so. We get to start off with the number 1 overall pick. Well, it's our very own Route 1 Birbs here. Michael ended up grabbing the Walking Wake, Decidueye Hisui, and Dedenne pod right away, and at the very end of the draft, the Hawlucha, Typhlosion, Mudsdale pod. Walking Wake had to have been a big highlight here. First overall is pretty interesting. Wonder if we'll get any nice little pair-ups with that. This seems, again, 2 pods. We didn't really have a choice on the second one, but Steve, I think there might be a little bit of defensive synergy here, actually. What are you saying as far as typing goes?
With regards to typing, it is there are a couple of weaknesses standing out. Looking through the types, Fairy seems to be a fairly large issue for the team with 3 weaknesses and only 1 resist currently. Flying's a little bit of an issue with 2 weaknesses and only the tier 5 Dedenne as a resist. Ghost is all neutral. Normal is all neutral. Ice only has a single resist with 3 weaknesses. Poison just has 2 weaknesses with the single resist in Mudsdale. Psychic, 2 weaknesses, no resists. Handful of types that the Birbs are going to really want to take a look at and kind of resolve. Outside of that, though, they kind of have compounding weaknesses and resistances. No weaknesses to bug, no weaknesses to dark, none to fighting, none to steel. They got a couple of nice types paired up with a couple of bad ones. So, a couple of auctions later could really fix this team up. Another thing I'll take a look at is the speeds of the teams. The Birbs here have a little bit of a cluster of speed tiers. They have a really well developed high end with 118 with the Lucha, and then 109 with the Walking Wake, 101 with the Dedenne, 100 with Typhlosion. However, those are kind of really packed up in that top space, and outside of that, it gets really sparse. Decidueye down there at 60, and then Mudsdale at 35. So another thing they're going to try to fill out here is these lower speed tiers once they get the chance.
All right, Michael, what are you seeing about your team as far as move selection and ideas like that go?
Yeah, so it's, all of these teams are definitely works in progress, but I've got some stuff to work here. As far as priority goes, you like to have that on a team. Really, my best priority is in that Hisui and Decidueye with both Shadow Sneak and Sucker Punch. Otherwise, I've got, Aqua Jet from the Walking Wake, but, of course, Walking Wake tends to be a special attacker, so probably not getting as much use out of that. I've only got 1 Hazard Setter and Rocks from that Mudsdale, but I do better than a lot of people here with 2 Hazard Removers Defog on both the Hawlucha and the Hisui and Decidueye. Going as far as looking at pivot moves for the turn, I've got a little bit of Volt Turn here. We've got U-Turn on the Decidueye and the Hawlucha, and the Volt Switch and U-Turn on the Dedenne. Gives me a little bit of pivoting options, not, from like the big Walking Wake, which would love a flip turn or something, but doesn't get anything like that. Not a whole lot to talk of in the, support department as far as, like, screens or wish passing or anything is going. Decidueye does have knockoff, which is nice, and Decidueye and Hawlucha both have taunt, which should give some utility. But then looking at status spreading, Dedenne is fine at spreading paralysis, and Typhlosion can spread burns with Will-O-Wisp, but that's about all I'm working with in the status department. Which is pretty bare bones as far as what you'd like to see. But, we've got lots of time to fill it out. And then, we're looking at, well, what are the kind of, best setup moves here for this team. Walking Wake gets Dragon Dance if you want to run a very funny physical set 1 week. But we're really looking at stuff like Swords Dance and Trailblaze on the Hawlucha. Trailblaze and Swords Dance on Hawlucha and Decidueye, both. Mudsdale's got like Iron Defense Body Press, but that's kind of about it. Not a whole bunch of setup sweepers, probably aside from that Hawlucha, and the Decidueye with its low speed is going to make it a little bit harder to pull off. But there are certainly some options there. Nate, what do you think about these 6 months that I ended up with?
Yeah, that Walking Wake definitely stands out here. Paired up with the Typhlosion, I know you're trying to find Sun from somewhere, whether it's going to be a manual setup from something like Typhlosion. That really stands out as a big positive. Along with Hawlucha, I could see Walking Wake with a few turns in Sun and Unverdant Hawlucha. Good luck trying to wall that. But I think Steve is definitely right on the weaknesses here with those clumped speed tiers and a lot of these types that hit your team very well neutrally. Obviously, that's going to be a problem when you only have 6 mons and maybe just a couple trips into the auction to find maybe a bulky wall or something to set up the Sun more reliably to go with it. Otherwise, I'm still a little bit stunned you ended up with the Hawlucha pod at the end. That was one of my favorite pod Bs, and it lasted all the way to the very end, so good on you, Michael. Enjoy using the Walking Wake, the first one to do so in our league. Now we get to move on to the number 2 pick. It's the Music City Mudkips, who actually went the other direction and immediately picked their pod B first, highlighted by that Hisuian Samurott. They also picked up the other Decidueye. Maybe it's the Decidueyes. What do these coaches know that we don't? And then the Alolan Raichu. And then later at the very end, getting the final pod A in Heatran, Staraptor, and Leafeon. There is a little bit of overlap here, Steve, but this looks kind of promising, actually. What do you got for us?
The typing here looks a lot better. In terms of overall weaknesses, there are a couple types where there are more weaknesses than resists. However, the resists tend to be on the higher tier mons. You could look at Bug where there are 3 weaknesses, but then you have Heatran as the tier 1 with that quad resist, so that's really not an issue. Dark hits, Decidueye and Raichu Alola super effectively, but you have the higher tier Samurott with the resist. Really the only thing that stands out as a potential problem is Rock, where you have Staraptor weak and everything else being neutral. All the other types seem to be covered fairly well by one of the higher tier members at least, or have multiple lower tier members with resist to compensate. So overall, a very well put together team, especially for one where the second group was not chosen by the coach. With regards to speed, the tiering is a lot better in specifically the middle. We have Raichu Alola at 110, Staraptor at 100, Leafeon at 95, Samurott at 85, 77 from Heatran, and Decidueye was 70. Really nice steps from 70 to 110, right in that sweet spot of speeds. So they're all set there. They'll just be looking to expand their extremes, getting a couple slower mons, perhaps, to force some speed investment there, as well as something faster than 110 to kind of be that capstone piece.
And what else are you seeing here then from the team, Michael, in terms of moves, setup, etc.?
Yeah, so looking at the team, we said they might want something a little bit at, the really fast end of things, but they've actually got a lot of priority to make up for that. Staraptor has Stab Quick Attack, Samurott Hisui has Aqua Jet and Sucker Punch, Decidueye has Shadow Sneak and Sucker Punch, Alolan Raichu has Quick Attack, but more importantly, probably something like Fake Out. So that's actually a lot of options to, try and hit something really at the insane speed tiers. Looking for hazards, they've got rocks from the Heatran, and of course, Ceaseless Edge, that new spike-setting attack from the Hisuian Samurott, gives them actually very good hazard plate from the get-go. They do have a Defogger in Decidueye, probably not one of the most reliable Defoggers, but no one was getting... there wasn't a whole lot to go around in this draft, so just coming up with anything, especially something that forms, a Fire, Water, Grass Core with that Heatran and Samurott, I think you're pretty dang happy with. They've got U-Turn on the Staraptor and Decidueye, as well as Volt Switch on the Alolan Raichu for a little bit of pivoting. Some screens options coming from the Raichu, as well as Light Screen from the Decidueye, but perhaps maybe we'll see a fast Light Clay dual screens Raichu some week. They do have Wish on both the Leafeon and the Raichu, giving them a little bit of sustain. 2 knockoff users in the Samurott and the Decidueye being really nice. Knockoff still not particularly widely distributed, and having 2 users right off the bat, pretty nice. 2 taunt users in Heatran and the Samurott. They've got not a whole lot of status spraying to do. They've got, the Will-O-Wisp from the Heatran. They've got Nuzzle and Thunderwave from the Raichu. And they've got Yawn and Leech Seed from the Leafeon. So doing pretty well for this early on, but, they might be looking to fill that with some more diverse status options later in the season through the auctions. Looking as far as, what are their big threats here? Well, you've got Flame Charge on Heatran for a very funny set 1 week. Leafeon, of course, has Trailblaze and Sword Stance. Sword Stance on the Hisuian Samurott. The Decidueye, who also gets a Nasty Plot if you want to be funny and run special 1 week. Nasty Plot on the Raichu. As well as Calm Mind and Stored Power, give that some fun. So I think actually, for like Steve said, they didn't get a pick of their last pod because it was just the last pod available of that category. This is a remarkably well-rounded out team here. Nate, what do you think of it?
I absolutely agree. It seems very opposite from your team, where you have a couple options that very obviously just want maybe 1 turn of setup and that's about it. You can punch a giant hole through the team or clean up. This feels like this team actually has the ability to have a more balanced game plan going. I'm really impressed by the Samurott Hisui and the Decidueye synergy there with their typings. Already really nice, and Heatran's just looking for 1 or 2 excuses to be able to switch in, which I think both of those provide as well. Really solid Fire, Water, Grass core there already. I can't overlook the Samurott Hisui, especially being able to set up spikes with an attack as well, just not giving up any momentum. I think if there was any pod B to dip into, this was the one, probably just because of that Samurott and the ability to go with the Decidueye, which, as was also mentioned, provides a little bit of hazard removal pressure as well. Not that you necessarily need it if you're going to be putting pressure on with spikes, but really impressive overall here. Not too many holes to fill out. Again, probably that Fairy Resist would be something really nice to see, but honestly, this is surprisingly one of the better, more well-rounded teams. Excited to see what happens with this one. To move on to the number 3 overall pick, who dipped back into Pod A. It's the Wooper Troopers. The Wooper Club League loves their Corviknight, and Corviknight was the second Pod A off the board with the Corviknight, Delphox, Ampharos pod. And then near the very end of the draft, we see the Noivern, Tauros, Aqua, and Magneton. Doubling up on electric types here, Steve, but Corviknight appreciates any help we can get. What are we looking at with these stats and typings?
Yeah, although they did end up doubling up on electric types, those 2 electric types are the bottom tier mons, so there is a little bit of a concern still for electric with the Corviknight and Tauros Aqua both being weak to it. It is technically covered, but something I figured worth mentioning. Outside of that, Ghost is a big one that stands out here, with the Delphox being weak and everything else being neutral. A very exploitable type to use against the team right now. Something a little more interesting would be Ground, where all the low-tier mons are, with the exception of Tauros, I guess, are weak. Delphox, Magneton, and Ampharos, none of them liking Ground. However, having 2 flying types as the Tier 1 and Tier 2 with Corviknight and Noivern really helping that out, so it's probably actually not that good of a type to attack the team with. The other type I'll mention is Rock, with Noivern and Delphox both being weak and at least being neutral to Corviknight. However, the Tauros and Magneton both resisting, so again, pretty neutral. All in all, pretty solid. Weaknesses are covered. There's a couple of instances where, based on how you value the mons based on their tier, you could say there's a couple weaknesses and Ghost, but otherwise it seems fairly well balanced in terms of typing. Taking a look at the speed, we have a little more clustering than the previous team, although they do have a fairly good high-end established with Noivern at 123, then a little bit of clustering around 100 with the Delphox at 104 and Tauros Aqua at 100, and then a little bit of a drop down to Magneton 70, Corviknight 67, and then Ampharos at 55. Definitely has some nice gaps, just really needs to fill in really between 70, 100, and probably between the 104 and 123 to really flush out a nice speed tiering setup.
Like I said, those two steel types are looking pretty nice to help up with these stats. I think the move pools are going to be the other spot where we see this team shine. What do we got, Michael?
Yeah, so luckily they've got that Noivern at that 123 base speed, because their only priority option really that I'm seeing is Aqua Jet from that Tauros Aqua breed, which is, great on that Pokemon, but really their only option. Looking much better, though, is their hazard removal, where they have two excellent defoggers in Corviknight and Noivern. And, well, you'll notice I skipped over, actually, their hazard setters, because they don't really have anything going as far as hazards go for their team. I could be missing something, but, yeah, I just see no hazards for their team. Of course, if you're defogging everything away with your Corviknight, how much are you missing all that? For pivoting, they've got U-turn on the Corviknight and the Noivern, as well as Volt Switch from their electric types. Electric types, especially early in the week, at least one of them is going to be coming, so, nice to have that there. And then U-turn, very reliable on the reliable Corviknight and Noivern, great to have. They've actually got a lot of screens play, with dual screens being available on the Corviknight, Delphox, Ampharos, and Magneton. So it'd be interesting to see if they go with like a dual screen setup 1 week into something like a setup Tauros or Delphox. So I think they've got the options there. Wish from the Delphox, probably not going to see much use as a sustain for the team, but Taunt on the Corviknight and Noivern will certainly see some use. For status, they've got Thunder Wave from their electric types, as well as Will-O-Wisp and Hypnosis coming from that Delphox. As some options, as always, as I've been saying with these teams, you'd like to fill that out going on, but you've got some decent options there. And then, we see what on their team is going to be a big threat. Corviknight, of course, can run that Iron Defense Body Press as well as Bulk Up. The Delphox, I think, could be quite nasty with access to Nasty Plot, Flame Charge, Agility, Calm Mind, and Stored Power. And then don't leave out that Ampharos with something like a very fun Cotton Guard Charge Beam set. I think that could be pretty interesting. Then we look at, the Tauros, I think, is probably the other big setup sweeper for this team, with access to things like Trailblaze and Bulk Up, as well as Body Press off that stab fighting type. And then, of course, Magneton also has Iron Defense and Charge Beam, but is probably not going to be doing nearly as much with those as some of the other Pokemon. So I think they might be losing out a little bit as far as, top tier setup options, but I think some of their mons, I think that Delphox is going to be really sneakily strong with some of those setup options. What do you think about the team, Nate?
Setup is... I would like to see a little bit more power off the rip from this team as well. Something I'd like to see some specs options and some band options to be able to get a little bit more firepower. Generally don't see Corviknight and Noivern as those options, but you may be able to get away with something like a Specs Noivern a little bit more with another defogger right there. The Specs Delphox, Nasty Plot Delphox, want to see some firepower. The other thing I really want to see is a ground type. Steve did cover the electric weakness potentially there with a couple of lower tier mons. A ground type seems like it would fit very well with Corviknight. Fire seems very well covered. Electric, not as much. A ground type also to be able to provide hazards would be a big deal to be able to help break through some teams. This team can still force some switches, I think, especially with some of those choice options there too. And as Steve said too, if you can find something to round out those features a little bit, we're actually already starting to look pretty good already, which is really nice. Hopefully we can see a little bit from the Ampharos here too, as a tier 5, but I think it could actually help out quite a bit there too. Let's get a little more physical offense going here too, but we're actually closer than you may think to a well-rounded team with the Troopers. Next up, we're going to go with number 4. Picking from Pod A once again, it's the Seattle Steamrollers. Not quite screwed on their draft pick this time around because they were able to get that Enamorous, Gallade, and Hisuian Sliggoo pod up there at pick number 4, and followed that up at the end of the draft with the Basculegion, Toedscroll, and Bellybolt. A couple of big standouts here, Steve. What are you seeing as far as typings and speed go?
Typings generally look good for the team. There are a couple of standout types that don't currently have resist. Fairy being neutral against the whole team, but hitting Gallade super effectively, and Ghost being neutral with the exceptions of hitting, again, Gallade and Basculegion super effectively. Those really stand out. Outside of that, there are a couple instances based on tiering and whatnot. Electric is good into the top 2 tiers with hitting Enamorous and Basculegion super effectively. However, that is covered by the low tiers with Sliggoo, Toedscroll, and Bellybolt all resisting or being immune to that. Additionally, Flying just has the resists of the bottom 2 tiers of Sliggoo and Bellybolt, while being super effective on the mid-tier, tier 3s. So that is something else the Steamrollers may want to take a look at. And then one more thing I thought I would mention is Ice, especially when you have the 4x weakness in Toedscroll and your tier 1 being weak in Enamorous. Only having the 1 resist in Basculegion may be okay, but it could be something the Steamrollers may want to look at improving. Taking a look at the speed stats, we have a little bit of clumping here again, but just in 3 different locations. Around 100, you have the Enamorous and the Toedscroll at 106 and 100. At around 80, you have 80 with Gallade and Basculegion at 78. And then at your lower speeds, you have the Sliggoo at 40 and the Bellybolt at 45. So a little bit of clumping at those 3 locations. You kind of need to build out between those locations. Of course, you also need a high-speed threat here. Something faster than Enamorous will certainly be desired soon. But all in all, you got a good starting point and somewhere to build to.
And we have a couple of move pool kings in this grouping here too, Michael. What do you got?
Yeah, so as far as covering that speed, they've got Aqua Jet, of course, being very nice coming off of that Basculegion, as well as the option to, run Rain sometimes with Swift Swim. Then Bellybolt's got Sucker Punch, and Gallade has Shadow Sneak. Not as good as that Aqua Jet option, but still options that they have. Of course, things look better when we've got Toxic Spikes and regular Spikes coming from that Toedscroll, who also has Rapid Spin, serving as the all-around hazard remover and setter for this team. Not a whole lot of pivoting going on, though. We've got Volt Switch from the Bellybolt and Teleport from the Gallade, but that's not really a lot of pivoting from especially a coach like this one who we know loves their pivot moves. They do have more options, though, to protect switch-ins with dual screens options coming from the Gallade, Toedscroll, and Bellybolt. So that might be an option to maybe help them not lose too much momentum on a switch. We've got Knockoff coming from the Toedscroll and Gallade, providing nice utility, as well as Taunt from the Enamorous, Gallade, and Toedscroll. Then we've got a lot of status on this team already. It's actually really impressive. Thunderwave, Hypnosis, and Will-O-Wisp on that Gallade. Stun Store for Poison Powder and Spore on the Toedscroll. Thunderwave on the Bellybolt. And then, of course, Toxic and Leech Seed I missed on the Toedscroll to mention there. That's a lot of options covering pretty much all of the bases. You've got Toxic, you've got Leech Seed, you've got Paralysis, Burn, Sleep. It's really impressive. Then looking at, what could be a big threat here, Enamorous gets Calm Mind and Agility, taking that 135 base special attack and making it absolutely ludicrous. Gallade has Sword Stance and Agility, as well as Bulk Up to be a pretty threatening mon with that new Sharpness ability it's got. The Hisuian Sliggoo can boost its defense with stuff like Acid Armor's Signature Shelter, as well as Curse, if you wanted to be cheeky with a little bit of an offensive set, perhaps 1 week. And then, Toedscroll has Growth, but we'll probably see it as more of a support piece. And Bellybolt has Charge Beam, but probably being a low tier, not going to see that much use out of it. But that Gallade and that Enamorous could actually be truly, truly terrifying if they get set up, so not too bad there. Nate, what do you think of the team overall?
I definitely agree with those two being big threats. I want to see what he can come up with for the Basket Legion. I know that things like Gallade get Rain Dance, wonder if that could help set up. Wonder if he'll end up using that as a breaker and maybe Gallade with a Scarf a little bit more often. Really curious about that. And definitely, like you said, too, there's not nearly as much pivoting on here as we're used to seeing from Chad. Probably looking towards something like a fast pivoter would be really nice. And then maybe one more setup sweeper potentially. Something like a Dragon Dancer I think would go very far on this team as well. Hopefully, Chad will see the value here in the Sliggoo Hisui, one of the, I think, most slept on tier 5s so far right now. Yes, it's just a Sliggoo, but man, that typing is so good. Those defenses of the Eviolite, watch out for this thing. I think Chad, as a creative coach, could come up with some very outstanding ideas for this one. Next up at number 5, we have the Boulder Boldores here, and we have a well, maybe the best hazard removing options yet. Great Tusk obviously stands out there along with the Kilowattrel and Flareon in that pod. And then for the pod B, the Azelf, Chestnut, Avalugg, Hisui. Some really interesting options here. Steve, what do these stats and typing say about them?
So looking at the typings in terms of resists, there are a couple of ones that are a little weak. Dragon is neutral across the board, making it a great TI into this attack for a powerful stab attacker. Ghost also is very good with having just one weakness with Azelf and everything else being neutral. There are a couple others that do have some resists, but they're not the best resists. Fairy looks pretty good into the team, with the only resist being Flareon, with 2 weaknesses, including top-tier Great Tusk. Flareon, it can be a little bulky, but it is, of course, the tier 5, so certainly we'll want to pick up another Fairy resist at some point. For that same reason, Fire can be a little iffy. Flareon is the only resist or immunity, depending on ability to fire. However, there's Chestnut being weak to that and otherwise being neutral, something to keep an eye on. Another type I have noted here is Flying, with, again, Great Tusk being weak and Chestnut being quad weak. There are 2 resists to back that up, being the Avalugg and the Kilowattrel. But again, because of the higher tier mons being weak, I figured it would be worth noting. Ice stands out as another one to keep your eyes on. Great Tusk, Kilowattrel, and Chestnut all being weak to it, with resists in the bottom 2 tiers of Flareon and Avalugg. Another case where the top tiers are kind of sharing some weaknesses. Psychic is worth noting, with the only resist being Azelf. This time, Azelf is one of the higher tiers. However, Azelf does tend to have paper-like defenses. Not the most paper, but still Psychic is, on average, a pretty good type into the team. And Water is actually a good type into the team, with Chestnut being the only resist and 3 weaknesses, and Great Tusk, Flareon, and Avalugg Hisui to punish with your Water-type attacks. Taking a look at the speeds, we have a much greater spread than on some of the previous teams. Kilowattrel leading the way at 125 at the top. A nice 10-point gap down to 115 with Azelf. Kind of the big gap right now, a jump down to 87 with Great Tusk. And then a jump down to 65 and 64 for Flareon and Chestnut and Avalugg, bringing up the rear at 38. We'll definitely want to fill in that distance between Great Tusk and Azelf with some other key threats in the 100, mid-90s, maybe mid-100s. Get a 1 or 2 more mons in there will really help, as well as a couple mons slower than Great Tusk before you start getting into mons that tend to not invest in speed would be pretty good. But overall, a pretty good starting spread with a couple holes to patch.
And Michael, what are some of those holes that still need to be patched concerning some of the moves that we may or may not have a lot of?
Yeah, so their priority options are pretty limited. Kilowattrel gets quick attack, but it's fast enough as isn't a special attacker. Flareon might be able to make some interesting work with quick attack. Something like a Guts boosted Terranormal quick attack could actually be pretty strong, but that's really all they got, so could add some more there. Their hazard game is, as you had alluded to, incredible. Rocks from Great Tusk, Azelf, and that Hisui and Avalugg, as well as spikes from the Chestnut. Fantastic hazard setting game, and just as good for removal. 2 rapid spinners in Great Tusk, arguably the greatest remover in the game right now, and then Avalugg Hisui with rapid spin. Of course, you know, having a rock weakness, not wanting to switch into a bunch of hazards, but with great base stats, could be a Terra option, which might let it spin a bit easier. Fair amount of pivoting options here. Not really. U-turn and Volt Switch on the Kilowattrel, U-turn on the Azelf, and then Baton Pass on the Flareon. Really, they would like to see some more pivots, especially from kind of that slower angle, because they have those fast pivots already. Dual screens on the Azelf, and then Reflect on the Chestnut, as well as perhaps eventually a cheeky Aurora Veil from the Hisuian Avalugg could give them a little bit of that bulk swishing around, though. Wish from the Flareon could come out in a pinch, but probably not going to be showing up. Knock off from the Great Tusk, as well as Taunt on the Tusk, Azelf, and Chestnut, providing some nice utility in the support options there. And then looking at the status options, Underway from the Kilowattrel and the Azelf, Leech Seed from the Chestnut, and then Yawn and Will-O-Wisp from the Flareon gives them some pretty decent options starting out here. Now we look at, what could boost up and really sweep through teams here. Great Tusk, of course, can run Rapid Spin and Bulk Up to become an absolute monster. Flareon gets Trailblaze and Curse, which, with the lower Terra options this season, could potentially see some use, but really I think the stars of the show are Chestnut, with a Sword Stance, Iron Defense, Trailblaze, Bulk Up, Body Press, Belly Drum, and Curse, as well as being Terra viable this season, could go absolutely insane. Then you have on the special side Azelf with Mystical Power, the new Psychic type Torch Song at home, base 70 power, 90% accurate Psychic move with that 100% chance to raise special attack. Nasty Plot, Calm Mind, Stored Power, Azelf with all of its incredible coverage options, 2 speed and special attack, could be an absolute monster this season. And then, I mentioned it before, Avalugg, really, we don't like because of that ×4 fighting and steel weakness, as well as the ×2 rock weakness, but if it tears out of it, maybe something like an Iron Defense, Body Press, or a Curse set really could go off. I could definitely see it happening. Nate, what do you think of this team here?
I think you've touched on what I think is maybe the most important part of the team here. Those 4 lower tier options, all able to Terra, all I think could abuse that very, very well. This is maybe the best Terra abuse team we've seen so far, maybe in the entire draft. Avalugg really does stand out for that. Terra it out of that typing into something like Fairy. Oh my goodness, what an absolute pain. Kilowattrel would appreciate a little bit extra coverage. You mentioned Chestnut getting opportunities. Flareon with some cheeky, like during normal Facade with the gut set could be very interesting. A lot going on here with all that for sure. Maybe the other thing that stands out in a negative light is there's a lot of physical offense and defense on this team. It seems relatively easy to take apart with some special attacking because the Tusk, Chestnut, and Avalugg are all very physically inclined, especially defensively. They're giant defense stats, don't get me wrong, but good luck trying to wall too many special sets here. But really, the amount of setup options really, I think, touches on something else, too. I think the coach is going to have to rely on a trick here or there, come up with a set that really works for him. But if you do, my goodness, you tear that hole in it that you need for the rest of your team to go off. This could be one to watch. It's a very interesting one, for sure. Moving on to the number 6 pick of the draft, we're going to move along into the Corviknight Clobberers with a very fun Pod A of Palafin, Brute Bonnet, and Spidops, and complementing that with the Pod B of Cleafor, Electros, and Veluza. A lot of really interesting ones here, Steve. The Palafin stands out a bit, but what are we seeing with the typings and speeds?
With regards to the typings, this team has multiple types that I really need to call out here. I'll start with Bug, of course, with Brute Bonnet and Veluza both being weak and no resist. Bug is something this team has to watch out for, which cannot be said about many teams. Dragon also being completely neutral for this team, something they'll need to take a look at. Fairy with Brute Bonnet being a weakness and no resist, another type that they really need to take a look at. Flying, able to hit Brute Bonnet and Spidops with the single resist in Electros could be an issue. And the other type worth mentioning is Rock with the 2 weaknesses of Spidops and Cleafor and no resist. A handful of types here that do not have any resists that the Clobberers are really going to want to address early on in the auctions. Taking a look at their speed, They have a decent laddering at the low speeds. However, their high end is kind of limited. Palafin Hero at the top at 100 speed. Outside of that, though, you drop down to Cleavor at 85, Veluza at 70, Brute Bonnet at 55, Electros at 50, and Spidups at 35. A lot of these speed drops being kind of the bare minimum of what I would typically look for with 15. So kind of really good spacing for what they have, but we'll definitely want some mons above 100, and then probably some more to fill out the marginally okay gaps at the bottom.
And I think they have enough to make up for some of those speed gaps here already, Michael. What are we looking at with moves?
Yeah, so they actually have a pretty good way to deal with that speed deficit. Sucker Punch from the Brute Bonnet, Aqua Jet from the Veluza, First Impression and Sucker Punch from the Spidops, as well as Quick Attack, probably not likely to come, but an option on the Cleavor. We do have a look at their hazards, though. We've got Stealth Rock and the attacking Stone Axe to set up rocks as well from the Cleavor, as well as Spikes, Toxic Spikes, and Sticky Webs from that Spidops. Something like Sticky Webs laid down to cut the speeds of the opponents for that Palafin Hero with like a Choice Band, or that Cleavor with a Swords Dance could be real nasty. For removal options, we actually have Defog from the Cleavor. Might not want to run it all of the weeks, but a fun option to have. We've then got a fair amount of pivoting. U-turn on the Spidops, Cleavor, and Electros, who also gets Volt Switch. Could be a little bit more pivoting, but, you know, it's pretty solid. Oh, of course, and Flip Turn from that Palafin. Light Screen on the Electros and Cleavor, really their only damage-reducing options. Not the most it could be doing there, but a pretty... I think something we don't see the coaches pull out that often. Not that big a deal. No Wish Passers, no knockoff users, but Taunt on the Brute Bonnet and the Spidops, providing a little bit of utility. Then we've got Stun Spore and Spore from the Brute Bonnet, and Thunder Wave from the Electros being their only status options. Definitely would like to see them pick up some more options there. But we've then got some pretty scary setup options. Brute Bonnet, of course, having Protosynthesis, able to use a boost energy to boost that, as well as with options to stuff like Trailblaze and Growth, potentially in a cheeky manual Sun setup. Swords Dance and Trailblaze on Cleavor could make it a very big threat. Then you've got the variety of Electra setup options, stuff like Bulk Up Coil Charge Beam as an option, and then Veluza with Fillet Away being its signature variation on Shell Smash, as well as Stored Power, could make it a surprisingly scary mon in one of these matches if someone is not prepared for that. Nate, what do you think of the team overall?
I like a lot of the pieces within this team, and I like a lot of them together, but really stood out to me overall through this is Steve pointing out all of the holes that still remain in there. I do really like what Palafin brings. I like the idea of being able to have Spidops set up for it with things like Sticky Web, or even just getting some Toxic Spikes up with some brute offense. However, it does feel like there are a lot of holes still in here. I think if the coach is smart about their pickups in the auction, maybe get some pretty quickly to at least fill out the roster, and then be smart and deliberate with upgrading those, this is an outstanding base to work from. So I really look forward to seeing what this team can do with some of these really interesting and fun pieces. We go on to number 7 now, and that's going to be the Elyria Electabuzz, the only other coach to pick a Pod B first, and that's because they wanted the Hisuian Lilligant along with Chansey and Hisuian Typhlosion. And then for the Pod A that they got, it was the Hydreigon, Florges, Dugtrio, Alola Pod. Not bad gets there at all. Steve, what do we see about the typings and speeds?
Taking a look at the typings, there are a couple that stand out as usual. Fairy is super effective on the Tier 1 and Tier 2, both Lilligant and the Hydreigon, with only the bottom tier Typhlosion and Dugtrio for resist. It is even, but just based on the tier distribution, that is definitely something they're going to want to keep their eyes on. Fighting is a busy type for them, with weaknesses from Chansey, Hydreigon, and Dugtrio, and then resists or immunities from Typhlosion and Florges. Overall, the weaknesses tend to be on the higher tiers, so something to watch out for, but not the worst. Flying, on the other hand, hits pretty good. Super effective on Lilligant, neutral and everything, except the Dugtrio Lola, which due to its low tier stature and lack of bulk in general, means flying is just pretty free into the team as a whole. Another one like that is Ice, where it is good against both the top tiers, Lilligant and Hydreigon. However, Typhlosion is the only resist there. A little better than Dugtrio, but still a little concerning. And I'll also mention Poison, which has a similar issue, Lilligant and Florges both being weak. However, Dugtrio, Lola, and Typhlosion both resist, but again, the bottom 2 tiers, so something to look out for. The speeds are a little clumped up around 100, with Dugtrio at 110, Lilligant at 105, Hydreigon at 98, and Typhlosion at 95. But after that, you get some nice laddering in increments of roughly 25, Florges at 75 base, and Chansey at 50. So we'll be looking to see what this team does to fill out the speed gaps from 50 to 75 and from 75 to 95, as well as grabbing that top piece to kind of get their fast key offensive threat there. But with that, this team is looking pretty okay.
Sure, maybe need to fill out the speed tiers. What do they need to fill out in their move pools, Michael?
Well, going off that, the priority options on their team pretty lacking. Sucker Punch from that Alolan Dugtrio and Quick Attack from the Hisuian Typhlosion. Dugtrio might see some use out of that Sucker Punch, but Typhlosion probably isn't using that Quick Attack at all, so really they could stand to add some options there. Doing better on the hazard game, though, Stealth Rocks from the Chansey, Hydreigon, and Dugtrio give them plenty of options to set those up. And they've got Defog on the Hisuian Lilligant, which is actually a pretty fun combination with Hustle, being able to not just clear hazards, but also give that evasion drop so your Hustle moves are hitting. Not a whole lot of pivoting, though, just U-turn on the Hydreigon and Baton Pass from the Florges. Florges, of course, can use that to pass wishes, but really they'd love some more pivoting throughout. A little bit of damage reduction, Light Screen on Florges and Chansey, and Reflect on Hydreigon, but probably not going to see much of that from any of those. No true dual screens options. They do have Wish on the Florges, though, being able to keep the team healthy, which is very nice. Only Taunt user is Hydreigon, and no knockoff users means that they're probably going to look to pick up some disruption in those kinds of ways in the auctions going forward, but they're doing pretty good on status moves, at least. Thunder Wave from the Hydreigon, Stun Spore, Sleep Powder, and Leech Seed from the Lilligant, Thunder Wave and Sing from Chansey, as well as Will-O-Wisp from Typhlosion, gives them some pretty good starting options there, certainly better than some of the other teams we've looked at. Then we look at, well, what on their team could be a big threat. Hydreigon with Nasty Plot, definitely being able to drop some massive Draco Meteors throughout the season. Definitely something to watch out for. As well as something like a Calm Mind Florges. I didn't see that much use of it last season, but I do think it can put in the work. Something like Swords Dance on the Dugtrio could give it actually some decent offense to clean up late in the game. We'll see if it's able to do that. But, of course, the big story is Victory Dance on Lilligant Hisui. The physical Quiver Dance, raising attack, defense, and speed, makes this thing an absolutely insane Pokemon paired with Hustle. If you're feeling lucky enough to hit your moves, you're going to be doing crazy damage with that thing. Typhlosion also giving some options with stuff like Flame Charge and Calm Mind, but really when we talk about setup on this team, it's that Lilligant all the way. Nate, what do you think about this team? You think they're going to be able to put in the work?
Absolutely. That Lilligant for sure is going to put in the work. That Victory Dance really stands out quite a bit there. One thing to note, though, too, as I mentioned with the Boulderers being very physically heavy, note that their big tanks here, Florges and Chansey, very much leaning towards the special side. So maybe a little bit weak to the physical offense there. And yet, if you see that coming, I think there are still a few things you could do about that, which is nice. See a lot of immediate damage here, especially the Typhlosion and Hydreigon stand out there. Good bit of setup. Like you said, the Calm Mind Florges, especially with limited Terra options down to 3 and below, I think could be a huge deal. That Florges can be a pain very quickly. Again, I like the pieces here. A couple things to supplement this, and we're starting to see something potentially special from the Electabuzz. I wonder if they can break through this season here. We're going into the second half of the draft. We got the Kanto Kinglers up, and boy is this a funny team. We got the Landorus Therian, the Horse, Glastrier himself, and Komala, along with the Pod B of Cresselia, Salazzle, and the goodest boy Mabosstiff. Steve, how do the types and speeds line up here?
Starting off with the types, this team has multiple types that just hit completely neutrally. Dragon, Flying, and Normal. No resists, no weaknesses. All of those are definitely going to be issues we'll want to take a look at as auctions come in. Additionally, there are some weaknesses to Water and Rock, with mons like Landorus, Glastrier, and in both cases Salazzle being weak and no resists to cover for it. Outside of that, things are generally okay. The types tend to be simpler types that don't have many weaknesses or resistances. Tends to be a lot cleaner, a lot of neutral hits. But if I were to look at a couple more types, I'd say Dark hits most things neutrally. Cresselia super effective, and then resisted by Mabosstiff kind of stands out. As well as both Fire and Steel hitting Glastrier super effectively while being resisted by Salazzle, hitting everything else neutrally. Overall, a lot of neutral hits here that hopefully they're able to make good use of with their bulk. Taking a look at the speeds, we have a little bit of clumping. They have an okay top speed with Salazzle at 117, leaves them in a place where they might want to improve it, but you could leave 117 as your top speed. And then it drops down to Landorus Therian at 91, Cresselia and Mabosstiff at 85. A bit of a drop down to Komala at 65 and down to Glastrier at 30. Overall, there's a little bit of clumping at that 85 and 91. 3 mons right there isn't great. They'll certainly want to fill in from 91 to 117, as well as between the 85 and 65. But they do have some key speed set right now, and we'll certainly be looking for more in auctions.
Yeah, a lot of clumping and a lot of sameness here, but I think this is where the Kinglers could be very comfortable. What sorts of options then do they have, Michael?
Yeah, so not much in terms of the priority. Sucker Punch from Komala, Fake Out from Salazzle, really not doing a whole lot for them. Could work some there, but they've got Toxic Spikes from the Salazzle and Rocks from the Landorus Therian. Not the most in terms of hazard play there, but, you know, Landorus is probably going to be one of the most reliable rock setters, so not too worried about that for them. Their only removal is Rapid Spin on that Tier 5 Komala. Probably they could stand to pick up a better hazard remover later in the season, but at the beginning of the season, Komala might be able to get things done. Bigger thing, though, is not a whole lot of pivoting here. We've got U-turn on Komala, we've got U-turn on Landorus, but not a whole lot in general here. They could definitely stand to pick some more of that up later on in the season. Light Screen and Reflect, of course, dual screens options from that Cresselia, compared with its incredible bulk, could let it do some pretty nice support throughout the season, as well as stuff like Wish from Komala, and then Cresselia gets... It got a new support move, didn't it? It's Lunar Dance or something? Hold up. It's got Lunar Blessing and Lunar Dance now. Lunar Blessing giving it some longevity, as well as curing status for itself as a limited cleric move, and Lunar Dance, of course, letting it KO itself to fully restore the HP of an incoming Pokemon. Definitely going to make it a bulky support backbone of this team. Looking at some other options for Disruption, knockoff from the Salazzle, taunt on the Glastrier, the Salazzle, and the Mabosstiff. Give some decent options there. Then we look at status. Yawn and Sing from the Komala, giving it 2 ways to put you to sleep. Thunder Wave from Cresselia and Salazzle. Salazzle also having Toxic, Poison Gas, Poison Fang, and Will-O-Wisp. Lots of options to poison you there, but the Toxic and Will-O-Wisp really the important ones. But then we get into boosting options for this team. The Glastrier, definitely the scariest one, with the ability to Terra here, with the Chilling Neigh giving it boosts when it KOs stuff, and access to stuff like Sword Stance, Iron Defense, Trailblaze, and Body Press. Komala could do some cheeky stuff with Sword Stance and Rapid Spin, but the Glastrier is the scariest, aside from that huge, bulky Cresselia with stuff like Calm Mind and Stored Power, being able to be surprisingly offensive if it wants to be, Nasty Plot on that Salazzle to look out for, as well as Trailblaze from Mabostiff, and Home Claws maybe letting it do some weird stuff later on in the season. Nate, what do you think about this crazy team we got here?
I think this team looks very fun. I want to see Mabostiff do stuff. I want to see Komala do stuff. I want to see Glastrier under Trick Room. I want to see Glastrier with Terra, and you know the Kinglers are comfortable with that Landorus theory, and this looks like a total blast. Yes, there's a lot of neutral coverage that hits it, but that also means that the Kinglers are going to be able to hit back with a lot of very good neutral coverage too. I wonder what kinds of sets are you going to come up with here to try and outplay his opponents. Could be a total blast to watch through the season. I will keep my eye on what some of these mons are able to do. Next up, we've got the Cincinnati Incineroar, and oh boy, this is another fun one too. We've got Iron Treads, Moltres, and of course, Wug Trio rounding out the Pod A, with the Pod B being Iron Leaves, Quagsire, and Quillfish Hisui. At first look here, Steve, the typings look really solid. What do you see?
Yeah, the typings, looking through them, I kind of going to have to stretch a little bit. I'll start by talking about Ice, with Iron Leaves being weak and the only resist being Wug Trio, which not known for its bulk, so Ice is generally pretty good. But outside of that, it gets generally pretty good. I guess I could talk about Dark and Ghost, both of which hit Iron Leaves super effectively, are resisted by Quillfish Hisui, and otherwise hit everything neutrally. But that's about it in terms of having more weaknesses or even equal weaknesses to resist. In general, have pretty good synergy throughout the types. Things are typically covered by other members of the team. I'll briefly mention Fire is super effective on their top two, Iron Treads and Iron Leaves, but they do have 3 resists in their lower tiers, including both tier 3s to offset that. So all in all, this team looks very well balanced in terms of their typing. And with regards to their speed, it's also looking pretty solid. Having Wug Trio at the top at 120, then you go down to Iron Treads at 106, Iron Leaves at 104, a little bit of a jump to Moltres at 90, down to Quillfish Hisui at 85, and then Quagsire 35. Really, the speeds are spaced very well between 85 to 120, especially for only having 5 mons there. A little bit of clumping at the 104, 106, but it looks pretty good. We'll certainly want to add more mons under 85, and maybe a little bit of more diversity within those mid ranges. But honestly, great start in terms of the speed and great start in terms of the typing.
Yeah, it looks pretty good so far. What do you have for us then, Michael, with as far as the moves?
Yeah, they're looking pretty good there too. Not great on the priority side. Aqua Jet and Sucker Punch from the Wug Trio, Quick Attack from the Iron Leaves, and Aqua Jet from the Quillfish Hisui. Decent options, but probably not a whole lot of premium priority there. We've got Stealth Rock on the Treads, the Quagsire. We've got Spikes on the Quagsire and the Quillfish, and Toxic Spikes from the Quagsire and the Quillfish, giving them insane hazard setting potential right off the bat, combined with Iron Treads, also one of the best removers in the game right now with its rapid spin. Definitely something that can come every week and that can very reliably clear hazards away. Then got Volt Switch and U-Turn on Iron Treads and Moltres, giving them a little bit of pivoting, but they could stand to pick up some more. Nothing really to be said as far as damage reduction and wish passing for the team, but they do have knockoff from Iron Treads as well as taunt on Iron Leaves and the Hisui and Quillfish, giving them a little bit of disruption there. Toxic and Yawn from the Quagsire as well as Toxic from the Quillfish, and Will-O-Wisp from the Moltres being their status options. Would love to see some Thunder Wave users picked up somewhere along the way, but not too bad to start out. And then we've got the boosting options for the team. Iron Defense, Rapid Spin, and Body Press on that Iron Treads, giving it some interesting offensive sets it can run. Agility on Moltres, don't count it out just because it's usually bulky. That thing can do some damage. Sword Stance and Trailblaze and Agility on the Iron Leaves definitely could put in some work during the season. Probably not a lot happening from that Quagsire, but it does get Amnesia and Trailblaze if he tried to do something very funny. But yeah, I got no idea what that is. I just want to see a Quagsire set up. The Quillfish Hisui could set up, though, with Sword Stance, Agility, and Fell Stinger. If someone pulls off Fell Stinger, Quillfish Hisui, I'm pretty sure they just get to win the season right there. But that's what they got. Options kind of throughout. They can definitely stand to pick up a little bit of kind of everything, but they've got a decent foundation. What do you think, Nate?
I think show me Trailblaze Quagsire. But really, I see a lot of very good pieces together. The synergy is obviously great. Look at that Firewater Grasscore. Man, that's just insane. The early Steel type, the grounded Poison with Quillfish Hisui. You have basically everything that you need. I would just like to see a lot more offensive pressure. I think I'd like to start seeing some more extremes, right? More so in the offensive direction. Give me some do or die setup sweepers, or give me something that's just going to obliterate something in one hit to help complement the already set up cores. And I think this could be a ton of fun. Don't be too straightforward with the obvious cores that you have, and you're going to have a blast with this team. Shout out to Wug Trio. Let's go. And let's move on to the number 10 pick. It's going to be the Newport Noctowls, the defending champs here, and they're going to select with their Pod A, the Ursaluna, along with Mesprit and Lurantis, and then down below we have the Hisui and Gudra, the Vaporeon, and the Tauros combat form. A lot of interesting mods here, Steve, that we haven't really seen before. How do they mesh together?
Starting off with the typing, there are a couple types that don't have resistances. Dragon being neutral across the board, Fairy being neutral except with a weakness from the Tauros Paldea. So a little bit of issues there. Additionally, I'll mention the Fighting type, super effective on both the high tiers of Ursaluna and Gudra Hisui, with the only resist being Mesprit. A little bit differently, there's the Flying type, which is super effective on both the low tiers, but is resisted by Gudra, so maybe not actually an issue. And then I'll also mention Ice, super effective on Ursaluna and Lurantis, however, resisted by Vaporeon. So all in all, types seem to be handled very well. Not too many issues currently, and great matchup there. In terms of the speed, this team is on the slower end, partly by design of the Ursaluna pod. At the top is the Combat Tauros at 100, followed up by a potential Trick Room setter in Mesprit at 80. Then you have Vaporeon at 65, Gudra at 60, Ursaluna at 50, and Lurantis at 45. This team here is slow. That'll definitely be something, hopefully, that the Noctowls are able to either take advantage of or somehow mitigate.
I think if anyone can do it, I'm excited to see what the Noctowls have in store for us with that. It sounds like they already have quite a few options. What else can you fill us in on with, Michael?
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll see them pick up some speed throughout the season in the auctions. They could also stand to pick up some priority, really not much priority to speak of whatsoever on the team. Hazards, Stealth Rock coming from that Mesprit as a pretty decent rocker with, like Steve said, Trick Room options. I could see it being a bit more of a support piece than an offensive piece on this team, at least as it is built right now. Defog from the Lurantis giving them some hazard removal, although not the best remover. Pivoting, they could really stand to find some pivoting somewhere. U-turn on the Mesprit really being the only pivot move that I see that I would expect them to get much use out of. Going back to that idea of a supportive Mesprit, though, it does have dual screens access for the team, so even outside of Trick Room, something like Ursaluna behind screens just isn't going to die and is going to kill absolutely everything in front of it. Especially with something like Wish from Vaporeon healing it back up, I'm just getting more and more scared of this team as I talk about it. No knockoff users, and only taunt user is the Ursaluna, so definitely some things to look at there for what they might pick up in the auctions moving forward, as well as not a whole lot of status options. Thunderwave on the Mesprit and Yawn from the Vaporeon and Ursaluna being it. Definitely another area that they could improve on. But then we get to their boosting options. Ursaluna is insane with Sword Stance and Bulk Up on top of crazy stats, making an absolute monster. Mesprit also gets that mystical power that Torch Song knock off, as well as Nasty Plot and Calm Mind and Stored Power to be able to do some offensive stuff if they're not using it in that supportive role. Lurantis does get Contrary Leaf Storm, its claim to fame, so you can see that, but it is pretty one-dimensional along that line. Goodra does get Shelter to boost its defense combined with Body Press as well as Curse if you wanted to do a fun defensively offensive Goodra set. Vaporeon gets Calm Mind and Acid Armor as well as Stored Power for some setup options. Then the Tauros, of course, gets Trailblaze, Bulk Up, Body Press for some options there. But really, all we have to see is Ursaluna in Trick Room get off a Belly Drum, and I'm just looking away at that point. I'm scared. I'm scared, Nate. I don't want to think about this anymore.
Yeah, this is absolutely a support the castle kind of team here. Those top two mods there, the Ursaluna and Goodra, very good mods. I feel like they're very tough to use, but look at the support they have. Yeah, there's not too much pivoting, but Mesprit able to set up screens or do anything, or set up rocks for them or anything, be able to pivot into them is very nice. Vaporeon passing Wishes is, I think, absolutely huge for both of those two as well. This could be a kind of a prolonged game status here. However, the Ursaluna and Goodra with the power and coverage respectively to be able to rip through just about anything they want or need to. Again, this is going to require, I think, some very fine play here. However, I do trust the Noctowls to be able to do that. Really interested to see what else they come up with to support these options. Maybe try and take away a couple of the more spammable typings as well into them, some like fighting and ground potentially. If you can take care of a couple of those, I think we're in a real good spot moving forward. Next up, we're nearing the end of the draft. It's the Akron Aggrons back at it again, and they picked up a very interesting core for reasons we talked about earlier. We'll get to that. We've got the Meowscarada Torkoal Basculin pod, and the pod B being Overquill, Articuno Galar, and Ursaring. A lot of fun, interesting mons in this one, Steve. I know that there's Firewater Grass pod in there, but what do the typings say overall?
The typings have a couple of a good number of them that stand out. I'll start just by highlighting Dragon and Normal having no resists, so just free there. Additionally, no resist, but with some weaknesses included on Rock, weaknesses from Torkoal and the Articuno Galar. Outside of that, Bug looks a little questionable with Meowscarada having the big 4x weakness and only Torkoal as a resist. Electric is concerning with Articuno Galar and Basculin weak with only Meowscarada as a resist. Fairy just has the Torkoal as a resist with Meowscarada as a weakness. Fighting has Meowscarada and Ursaring as weaknesses with just Articuno Galar as a quad resist. That does help a little more. Flying just with the Meowscarada being weak, no resists. A little better is Ice, where you have Meowscarada and Articuno who are weak, but Torkoal and Basculin resisting. And, one more, Poison, Meowscarada weak, Overquill resist. So a lot of types that have a little bit of concerns to them. Definitely look for the Aggrons to address those. In terms of the speed, they have an alright spread here. Meowscarada at the top at 123. That's a great top piece, and they don't have to worry about getting something fast later in the auctions. And then they picked up Basculin at 98, Articuno Galar at 95, Overquill at 85, Ursaring at 55, and Torkoal at 20. A little bit of clumping in that 85 to 98, but decently spaced there. We'll definitely look to fill something between 98 and 123, especially around that 110 or so, as well as potentially some mons between 85 and 55 to fill out the lower speed tiers.
Got a little bit all over the place. Is that going to be the same with the move pools here, Michael?
Yeah, so let's start out looking at those priority options. Quick Attack and Sucker Punch from Meowscarada, Aqua Jet on the Basculin and the Overquill gives them a couple solid options there to start out. They're really looking nice on their hazard game, though. We've got Stealth Rock from the Torkoal, then we've got Spikes and Toxic Spikes coming from Meowscarada and Overquill, giving them a lot of hazard options there. And of course, with all those spikes set up, it's nice that they have a Rapid Spinner in Torkoal rather than a Defogger. Looking at their pivoting options, only U-turn on Meowscarada and Articuno Galar could do a little bit better there, but Meowscarada, fantastic U-turner, and I feel like we're actually going to see a lot of Articuno from this team, so nice to have U-turn there as well. Articuno can run double screens if it wants to be a bit more of a supportive piece. No Wish Passers, but we do have Knock Off on the Meowscarada, a very, very good Knock Offer. And then Taunt on Meowscarada, Basculin, Overquill, and Ursaring, giving them a pretty good ability to disrupt opponents. Looking at status, though, they've got a Will-O-Wisp and Yawn on the Torkoal, Toxic on the Overquill, Hypnosis on Articuno, Yawn on Ursaring, and Leech Seed on Meowscarada. Would love to see a T-Wave user in there somewhere, but pretty good to start off. Then we start looking at what the offensive move pool here is. Meowscarada, of course, can be running stuff like Nasty Plot for a surprise special set, Trailblaze, and Hone Claws. Torkoal can be doing stuff like Iron Defense, Body Press, Shell Smash. It probably won't, but it could. But then we've got stuff like Sword Stance and Fell Stinger on the Overquill, as well as Stockpile for a surprise, even bulkier set. Calm Mind, Stored Power on the Galarian Articuno, I think looks really scary. And then that Ursaring with some bulk from an Eviolite can pull off some fun stuff with Trailblaze, Sword Stance, Bulk Up, and Belly Drum options. So, be interesting to see if they're able to make that low-tier Mon go pretty far. What do you think about the team, Nate?
Yeah, this is solid, but really there is a turtle in the room, and that is Torkoal. That is a Sunmon, and there's really not that much here, and we have at least one user in this call who very much likes to have the Sun available, so I would expect that to be moved at some point here, despite all those positive traits it carries. That aside, a couple things that stand out. The top tier Mons, while pretty darn good, are kind of a little all over the place. They don't quite fit some of the usual roles. I think this is a team that wants to get another higher tier Mon relatively early, whether it be an early couple of tier 3s or a good tier 2 or something to help kind of round things out a little bit. I love the call on the Articuno Galar. That Mon looks outstanding here. We bumped it up to tier 3 because of its ability to abuse Terra. I think that and maybe the Ursaring look to be really key to me. If the Aggrons can start abusing those two really well and their natural power / bulk and be able to set up with them properly, this could be a whole lot of fun, especially if I'm seeing what kinds of shakeups we're getting with maybe the Torkoal and maybe use that to get ahead in the auctions a little bit here early. I'm wondering what will happen with that. Again, we're getting close to the end of the draft. Number 12 coming up here is going to be a rebrand, the Calgary Corviknights here, and they picked what we kind of anticipated to maybe be the worst Pod A, but here goes the Thunderous Diancie and Girafarig. A lot of interesting options there, with the Pod B being the Scizor, Regidrago, Frostlass. Really neat one there too. Steve, we kind of dubbed this maybe the worst Pod A, but maybe that's not true with the typings and speed. What are you seeing?
So looking at the typings here, things worked out very well for this grouping here. There is, of course, the weakness to Rock standing out with Thunderous and Frostlass both being weak and no resistances to work with. But outside of that, the only thing I guess I could mention is Dark, Girafarig, and Frostlass both being weak with Diancie as a resist. But again, that's your low-tier Mons and a bulkier mid-tier Mon kind of carrying that. Outside of that, everything seems to have resists. There are a couple types where there's maybe only one resist, but in general, things are covered fairly well. I could look at Steel here, where Diancie has a big problem, as well as Frostlass, but the top 2 tier picks of Scizor and Thunderous cover that. So really just fantastic on the typing. Only have to worry about Rock, and once that's fixed up, this team will be looking in a pretty good spot. Taking a look at the speed, we're seeing a situation here where the 2 pods had similar speed tiers, so when you put them together, it just kind of ended with roughly duplicates. Starting off with the Thunderous and Frostlass at 111 and 110, right next to each other there. Dropping it down then to Girafarig at 85 and Regidrago at 80. Again, pretty close there. And then kind of some lower speed Mons with the Scizor at 65 and Diancie at 50. Not as close. But, a little bit of gaps there. We'll definitely want something between 80 and 85 and 110, probably a Mon or 2 in there, as well as picking up things above 110 to kind of get that upper speed tier.
Man, we got a fantasy core working, and Michael, I know you love the Thunderous and Girafarig. What are you seeing in their move pools to work with?
Yeah, so Scizor, of course, has fantastic bullet punches to cover priority as far as getting some things at that super, super high speed tier. Frostlass also has Ice Shard, which it can sometimes bring, but not a whole lot of priority on the team, so I'm guessing they'll be looking to pick up something at that very fast speed tier somewhere in the auctions. Looking at hazards, they've got Stealth Rock and Spikes on that Diancie, as well as Spikes from the Frostlass. Not a whole lot of diversity there. I think Diancie is an excellent hazard setter, but I think that it might actually be a bit more of an offensive cornerstone of this team, so I'm not sure how many hazards it's going to be running. Scizor, of course, it's their only defogger, another one Pokemon that would like to probably be more offensive, but it can be defensive, running defog just fine. Looking at their pivot options, U-turn and Volt Switch both on the Thundurus, and U-turn on Scizor gives them some strong pivots from some of their top-tier Mons, but not a whole lot of pivoting throughout the rest of the team that they might be able to work on throughout the season. They do have a lot of damage reduction opportunities, though. Dual screens on Diancie and Girafarig and Regidrago and Frostlass, as well as Frostlass having access to Aurora Veil, means that this team could get insanely bulky if they wanted to be. They also have Girafarig, not the tankiest Pokemon, but it does have access to Wish to try to keep the rest of the team a little bit healthier. We then, of course, have Taunt from Thundurus, making use of that Prankster, as well as Taunt on Frostlass, giving them a little bit of disruption, but they could probably do a little bit better on that. And then their statuses are not diverse at all. Thunder Wave from the Thundurus with Prankster is great, as well as Thunder Wave on Girafarig and Frostlass, as well as Will-O-Wisp on the Frostlass, but no poison options anywhere or sleep. They could definitely look to fill that out as the season moves on. We then do go into what makes up their offensive move pool, though, and Thundurus, starting right off with Bulk Up, Agility, and Nasty Plot, as well as a funny Charge Beam, if you're so inclined, can be absolutely terrifying. Just gets that Prankster Nasty Plot up and starts firing off huge moves. But I think Diancie is sneakily absolutely terrifying. Being able to make use of that Terra, go to a pure fairy or like water type defensively, and then you've got Diamond Storm to raise its defense, Iron Defense, Body Press, Calm Mind, Rock Polish, Amnesia, Stored Power, a bunch of different options that this thing, with losing its 4 times weaknesses via Terra and its insane defenses, could just become absolutely unkillable. Girafarig has some setup options of its own, stuff like Nasty Plot and Calm Mind and Stored Power, but probably not going to be doing that much offensively. Scizor, however, of course, Swords Dance and Trail Blaze give it plenty of options to wreak havoc, and Dragon Dance on the Regidrago can also make that thing pretty scary, with all of its HP giving it time to set up a couple of those. Nate, what do you think about this team that I thought looked pretty hodgepodge at first, but actually comes together pretty dang well?
Totally agree with that. This came together extremely well, much better than I think any of us could have anticipated that Pod A would have done. Again, the synergy is so nice. Love the 2 Tier 3s together. You already mentioned the Terra potential from the Diancie and Regidrago. I guess, if anything, a couple types that we've kind of called out, I'd like to see probably a good water type, a good ground type, something with a little bit of bulk, something to be able to maybe set up some more hazards, provide a little bit more support for all those mons. The Diancie and Regidrago, while very good and Terra abusers, maybe a little more support. Yes, you have Scizor being able to U-turn, Thundurus spreading the T-Wave, but as you said, missing some things like Toxic and such like that would be quite nice. So maybe just a little bit more support from the draft, maybe some priority or some speed to help out a little bit, and maybe a little bit more pivoting. And we've got a very scary team on our hands here with the Calgary Corviknights. Next up, it's your very own Buffalo Bouffalant. Let's go Bouffalant. Picking up the Zoroark Hisui, Wo-Chen, and Crabominable Pod A, and following that up with the Arcanine Hisui, Braviary Hisui, and Orthworm in Pod B. A lot of Hisui mons here, a lot of new stuff that I'm excited to try out. But Steve, what do the typings and stats tell us?
So for the typings here, things are a pretty good mix. There are no types that don't have any resists. Definitely interacting with all types, so having at least a baseline there. Some types that stand out would be Dark into this team. super effective on the Zoroark Hisui, as well as the Braviary Hisui, being resisted by the Wo-Chien and Crabominal, although just worried about the higher tier mons being weak there. Another key one here is fighting, where you do have the Zoroark Hisui immunity and the Braviary Hisui quad resist, but everything else on the team is weak to it. Every mon interacting with fighting, so it'll be a key role here, figuring out how to get the resist or immunity in at the right time. Fire is another one that is a little bit of an issue, with that being super effective on Wo-Chien, Crabominal, and Earthworm, although Arcanine Hisui can be immune to it or is just neutrally quad resisted. A couple more. Water is a big issue here. Water being quad effective on the Arcanine Hisui, although Wo-Chien is the one and only resist there. A bulkier mon, so it could be okay, but definitely something to keep your eye on. And we'll finish it up with Rock, super effective on Arcanine Hisui, Braviary Hisui, but resisted by Earthworm. Taking a look at the speed tiers, we have a decent spread starting at the Zoroark at 105. Following that up with the Arcanine Hisui at 90, the Wo-Chien at 70, 265s of Earthworm and Braviary Hisui, and then Crabominal at 43. We'll definitely be looking for the Bouffalant to pick up some faster members, especially something between 70 and 90, as well as then something, probably two things faster than 105 to really spread that upper speed and fill out the mid-speed tiers.
And are those speed tiers and typings complemented at all by the move pools, Michael?
Yeah, so Shadow Sneak from the Hisui and Zoroark can be pretty decent, although it is already quite fast. But you then have the Hisui and Arcanine, as always, having that very reliable extreme speed. I think will be very useful for you in covering some of those upper echelons of the speed tiers. Looking at hazards, the Hisui and Arcanine does get Stealth Rocks, but we're probably more looking at Stealth Rocks and Spikes coming from that Earthworm to be putting in hazard work for your team right now. And then your Hisui and Braviary does have Defog, but I have a feeling you're going to be trying to be using that a bit more offensively. We'll see what you actually end up running on it week to week. For pivoting, Zoroark and Braviary both have U-turn. You could probably stand to do a little bit more there in terms of pivot options, but those two are probably going to be pretty big key offensive pieces for you, so having U-turn on them is very nice. Dual screens being able to be run on the Wo-Chien give you some ability to sustain and reduce some of that damage throughout their team. And then we look at two knockoff users in Zoroark and Wo-Chien, as well as Taunt on both of those Pokemon as well, giving those two Pokemon the ability to do a lot of disruption, but not a lot of depth in the team outside of those two. For status, you have Will-O-Wisp coming from Zoroark and Arcanine, and then Stun Spore, Poison Powder, and Leech Seed from the Wo-Chien. Would love to see you get some stuff like some Thunder Wave users, and just kind of diversify that status game of your team a bit, because it's very centralized on that Wo-Chien right now. Looking at your Pokemon's ability to set up, though, Zoroark Hisui looks pretty scary with Sword Stance and Nasty Plot options, depending on what side you want to be attacking from. Hone Claws, Calm Mind, Agility, a bunch of fun options for that Pokemon. Wo-Chien can get Growth and Trailblaze, but I'm not expecting to see that be an offensive core of your team anytime soon. That Crabominable, though, Iron Defense, Bulk Up, Body Press, even a weird Amnesia somewhere along the line. I think with Terra, that mon is going to be absolutely insane. Then you have Flame Charge for your Hisui and Arcanine, letting it do a bit of damage while boosting its speed to throw off those recoilless big damaging moves, thanks to its Rockhead ability. And then there's the Braviary. Ooh, I'm really excited to see what this thing does. Esper Wing, its signature move, boosting its speed, Calm Mind, Bulk Up, Agility, Hone Claws, Stored Power, a bunch of different options for that Pokemon. And of course, Earthworm, probably again another defensive piece, but Iron Defense, Coil, Curse, Body Press does give it some options to get out of hand if you find the right spot for it. Yeah, just run us through your thoughts on your teammate.
Yeah, this feels very polarizing, right? You see things like Arcanine Hisui, I think, is a prime example of that. Defensively, obviously very weak to a couple of very prominent types, but also provides some key resistances there as well for some interesting types. Very much all in with the offense as well, with the very strong moves. But can you imagine Head Smash missing in a key situation? I can't imagine missing 90% moves that often. But I do agree that a lot of this feels focused and centered around the Wo-Chen, and I'm not sure how much the team supports it to this point. We see 3 Mons that are weak to the same couple of types, Fire and Fighting, and Wo-Chen, Carbomnol, and Earthworm. And with Zoroark Hisui, it feels like I really need to be playing smart with these Mons. That said, these new Mons that I'm trying out they have so much potential in here too. I'm really excited to see what we can figure out with those, what we can unlock with these new, weird, interesting Mons, and see if we can get anything done with them. I think it's there. I think the possibility is there. Maybe just missing a couple of pieces we can get through the auction, so we'll have to play that smart as well. And finally, with the final pick, it was Steve's Waterdeep Wobbuffets picking up the last couple of pods here. He still had 3 pod A's to pick from, of course, but picked the Glowking, Zoroark, and Lycanroc Midnight, and followed that up back-to-back with the Enamorous, Therian, Inteleon, and Weirdeer. There are some very interesting themes going on here, Steve. What do the stats and types tell you?
So for the typing, there are a couple types that are an issue, most prominent of them being Electric, with both Enamorous and Inteleon being weak and no resist. Additionally, similar to that is the Rock type, with Enamorous being weak and there being no resists there. In addition to that, a Bug could be a little bit of a concern with Enamorous being the only resist, and Zoroark and Weirdeer both being weak. Ground is a bit of an issue with the Glowking and Lycanroc both being weak, and Enamorous being the only immunity. And Steel also being a little bit of an issue, with Inteleon and its Renowned Bulk being the only resist, while Enamorous and Lycanroc are weak. Taking a look at the speed stats, there is an alright spread, although a couple of slower Mons at the bottom. Inteleon at 120, follow that up with Zoroark at 105, Lycanroc Midnight at 82, Weirdeer at 65, Enamorous at 46, and Glowking at 30. Definitely will be looking to kind of fill those speed gaps between the 105 and the 82, ideally also picking up something in that 105 to 120 speed gap, although with Inteleon at the top there, it is okay to not go any faster, so that can be nice there.
All right, and what are we looking at in terms of the move pools for the Wobbuffets?
Yeah, so for priority, he's got a lot on that Inteleon, Sucker Punch, Aqua Jet, and Ice Shard, all on that Pokemon, but the bigger player here is that Sucker Punch stab coming off of the Zoroark. No other priority options, so it could be something you look at expanding into. For hazards, you've got Toxic Spikes coming from that Galarian Slowking and Stealth Rock from the Lycanroc Midnight, but that's really all you've got. I'm guessing that you're going to be picking up a more reliable rocker somewhere throughout the season, and a piece of removal from anywhere, because actually right now you don't have any hazard removal, so definitely expecting you to pick that up sooner rather than later. You do have a fair amount of pivoting though, Chilly Reception on that Galarian Slowking to proc that Regenerator easily. You turn on the fast Zoroark and Inteleon, gives you a pretty good starting point for building out your pivot options, but another area that I would like to see you add a couple of pieces. Dual screens on the Weirdeer and Inteleon as options, as well as light screen on Slowking. Weirdeer, probably the most likely to set up any screens if you're deciding to use them. Then we look at Knock Off on Zoroark, as well as Taunt on Slowking, Zoroark, Lycanroc, Enamorous, and Inteleon, giving you a fair amount of disruption on your team, which is that's nice right now starting out. Status, though, you have Thunder Wave, Toxic, and Yawn from the Slowking, and Thunder Wave and Hypnosis on the Weirdeer. Definitely would like you to spread out on that, getting some a Will-O-Wisp user on there. That's the status. Burn. There we go. However, you do look pretty good in the boosting department. Enamorous Therian, already fairly tanky, being able to run Calm Mind and Iron Defense with something like Draining Kiss to become an absolute monster of a wall. Swords Dance and Fellstinger on Inteleon, while fun, probably not going to be your options of choice. Lycanroc Midnight has stuff like Swords Dance, Bulk Up, and Trailblaze if you want to try and make your lower tier work. But then we get to the Galarian Slowking, Iron Defense, Nasty Plot, Amnesia, Curse, Calm Mind, Belly Drum, and Stored Power. That mon is already hard enough to take down, and it has plenty of options to make use of all of those turns. It's just sitting in there. So I definitely expect that mon to put in a lot of offensive work, even if you think of it defensively primarily. We've got Weirdeer getting its signature Psyshield Bash to raise defense, as well as Trailblaze, Agility, Calm Mind, and Stored Power as options. And then we've got Zoroark with Sword Stance, Nasty Plot, Hone Claws, Agility, Calm Mind, lots of options for that Pokemon as well. Be interested to see kind of what you favor as some of your setup mons this season, Steve. Nate, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think aside from the setup, everything feels very restrictive as it is right now, where you have a couple of very frail attackers, you have a couple of very bulky mons, and it feels like they're sort of pigeonholed into those roles as it is right now, hoping to maybe find some mid-speed, bulky offense potentially from the tiers maybe 3s or so, maybe some faster offense from the 1s. And the 2 to be able to kind of round out the team a little bit. We do really like all those setup options, and I think right now a lot of it is depending on how creative you can get with things like the Glowking and the Enamorus and the Weirdeer. So hoping you can find a couple more options sooner rather than later to help broaden those options. And once you do, I think the backbone here could actually surprise quite a few folks. With that, that is all 14 teams of the draft. Luckily with pods, it was only 2 rounds, so we were able to get through that relatively quickly in the drafting process. Well, just in 1 weekend, definitely a Wooper Club League record. But that will bring us not only to the end of the draft, but to the preview of Week 1. And yes, we'll go over the auction and results at the beginning of each recap video. But for now, we're just looking ahead to the Week 1 matchups, where we have 7 matchups each week. So Steve, there are quite a few interesting ones on here. What stands out to you?
I'll call out the Cincinnati Incineroar playing against the Corviknight Clobberers. The Incineroar having their comeback season last time, and are actually playing this game early due to their success in the VGC scene as well. So riding that wave of success, coming up against the Corviknight Clobberers, who just came through sweeping the Beginners League, winning that last season and doing so fairly easily. So excited to see what they're able to do here in the main league, going up against one of the longest standing coaches and comeback season extraordinaire, the Incineroar.
We had 2 very interesting storylines there. Michael, what catches your eye?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that my own match, the Birbs versus the Steamrollers, is just been living rent-free in my mind. Steve did say that I have a weakness to fairy types, and Enamorus can run super effective coverage for my entire team and still have room to run Calm Mind. So, yeah, that's not scary at all. But with this bit of a hectic and chaotic season, I definitely am planning to get a bit chaotic with my team building. I'm excited to see what we show up with and how the auction affects everything. Always very nervous, but excited for my matches against the Steamrollers, so should be a pretty good one.
Yeah, excited to see if either of you two can weather that storm that's coming there. The 2 that stand out to me, I think, are going to be rematches. In 2 matches that I thought were very good last season from the Paldean Conference. I'm talking about the Agrons and the Calgary Corviknight, rebranded from the Quiet Majesty, who had a fantastic match. I, of course, recall that Terra Rock Bisharp to help out with Chi Yu. Those 2 coaches that both made the playoffs and then were out immediately, looking to take a step up this time. The other one that catches my eye, the Noctowls and the Boldores. That was a really fun match that took several turns for anything to go down until the Noctowls finally were able to punch a hole. That aside, too, the Noctowls coming off an undefeated season, they have a very new, different, strange-looking team, and I want to see what they can do with it, and if their success will continue into this season as well. That's going to wrap it up for our draft recap plus Week 1 look ahead. Thank you again to Steve and to Michael for joining me in this journey, for going through some of the stats, everything about these teams. Obviously, there's going to be quite a few changes to the teams all throughout the season, not just from 1 or 2 times, but every single week we're going to have massive shakeups due to the auction schedule that's coming up. Catch us every week as we do recaps, not only catching up on the matches, but also what happens in the auctions. We've already concluded the first week's auction, and boy, this is going to be crazy. So again, join us every week as we go through those. We'll catch you then.